Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's July the 13th. That means it's the feast day of St. Henry II, the Holy Roman Emperor. And today I'm here with Dave, the Distributist, and we're going to talk about what could possibly consider the end of pop culture, or at least its current iteration. The fact that sort of the three big series, Game of Thrones, Star Wars, and the Marvel movies are sort of wrapping up this year. Game of Thrones and the Avengers have already done so, and now we have to slog through the last Star Wars movie, which I'm very curious to see because there's no possible way they could, fix all the mistakes that happened in the Last Jedi. So it's like there's going to be a car crash, and you just want to bring popcorn and see it, literally.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen. Well, that's kind of odd. I guess I have seen all of those. I did see Game of Thrones, and my sister-in-law kind of dragged me to see the Avengers Infinity War thing. So that is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just looking at the fact that I think Endgame was the last one, made like more money than any other movie in history. I think that might be enough for future historians to actually look back and go, "Wow, this was a huge thing." But like, does anybody? It's like, but an interesting observation I've noticed is that, like, at least for series that have very mediocre endings or fizzle out, like Game of Thrones did, which it was fun listening to Arjun and you talk about the end of it. That like nobody makes any Game of Thrones memes anymore. It's like people are like, Game of Thrones, what was that? No one cares. It's been just completely discarded.
It is kind of unusual. I mean, this is I don't think it's going to be looked back on particularly fondly, despite what people thought when it was going on. I mean, it's hard to think that anything is really. I mean, I don't know. It's always hard to do these things in hindsight, but it does seem that these pop culture phenomenons. I don't know. Are they worse? Are they less original? I guess the problems are sort of different among each one of them.
Yeah, and I think it's the different approaches, because I think with the Marvel movies they did it smart, not just in the fact that they sort of slowly built up to it, but it's the fact that nobody knew who Iron Man was, and it's like they helped sort of create the universe because it was still a largely niche thing, whereas everybody knows what Star Wars is. And I think there's sort of a conundrum I've noticed wherein it's sort of how much power should the fans of a series have versus the creators, because on the one hand, if you just go full on like, we want to just give the fans what they want, well, people don't really know what they want because they think they want what they've already had, but then they'll complain, like with The Force Awakens, that it's just too similar. But then when you try something different, they'll complain. And I think we even have a bigger problem now where it seems like the creators of these various pop culture series, particularly with Star Wars and with the train wreck that was the 2016 Ghostbusters, it seems that the people that are making these movies and franchises seem to actively hate large numbers of their core audience.
Well, I think in the case of the Marvel movies, that's what you get when the producers just focus group everything and give the fans exactly what they want. I mean, with a few exceptions, I don't think that there was anything that really deviated from what they were expecting or should have been expecting.
Whereas at the same time, if you actually give fans direct control, like what happened with a lot of the former, I guess the old canon of the Star Wars extended universe, people like Timothy Zahn, from what I've heard, like a lot of that stuff is way better written than a lot of the movies are. Like the story of Palpatine is infinitely more interesting than anything we get in the films.
I wouldn't doubt that there's going to be a subset of fans that could write really good fan fiction. But generally speaking, I think that's going to be a problem once it goes to a mass audience. And Avengers was not meant for a small number of dedicated fans. It was meant to appeal to the mass audience of really anyone, right? And I think this is one of the problems. Is I mean, I don't know. I mean, Avengers was pretty tolerable, if I'm being honest. But it was in some ways it was the least hated among the fans.
But it's also the least interesting.
Yeah, it's also by far the least interesting of all of them, and because of that, it's just it's hard to say like, oh, it was a really big success, you know. I don't really consider it as such. It seems to me to be a thoroughly mediocre movie.
I mean, success financially, but not success in terms of moving culture forward.
Well, yeah, obviously, I mean, all three of those things were. I mean, perhaps with the exception of The Last Jedi, that might be the one exception.
I mean, it's fascinating that like this younger generation of directors and filmmakers are just like. It sort of reminds me a little bit of like when after the Notre Dame Cathedral fire, you know, the French government held a contest for architects to see, can you design like, you know, a new spire and a new roof, and every single submission was just horribly wretched and like disgusting modern glass and steel garbage, eventually to the point where they just had to say, no, we're just going to try and rebuild it the way it was. And it seems like it's similar with film, wherein maybe certainly to a lesser extent, that modern filmmakers, when they're trying to ape off of or trying to create on top of established beloved franchises, they just seem utterly incapable of doing it.
I guess. I mean, I think they're really capable of doing a paint by numbers thing in Avengers, and that's kind of. I guess it's where I'm coming from right now, is that Avengers is sort of proof of concept that paint by numbers fans just don't want to have like meat and potatoes action movies. That doesn't satisfy them either at all.
But the thing is, like, when they try when like say with The Last Jedi, when they try something different, it turned out to be a disaster. Yeah,
and I mean, in some ways, this is obviously what I guess I feel in some sense that's a little bit of an excuse, because obviously the creators of The Last Jedi had produced a thoroughly uninspiring film, and they wanted the excuse to be, oh well, we were doing something different, as opposed to, you know, we were making some pretty obvious mistakes in terms of the characterization of everything. And you know, so I guess I'm a little skeptical of just going like, I mean, that is certainly the narrative people want to take, is that fans are totally impossible to satisfy, and there's certain truth to that. But I think it's just, I think that the problem is that the fans and the creators are so kind of fundamentally disconnected in their worldviews that something that's inspiring, or I don't know, maybe something that feels inspiring and fresh to a fan community is not going to be the same thing as feels inspiring and fresh to the people who create it. And that's obviously like a major problem.
But it's curious as to what's going to happen after this year, after the third Star Wars movie comes out, because, you know, the DC universe is just flopped around like a dead fish, which ironically, since the last one of these big budget movies I saw was Aquaman, because my dad is one of the 5 Aquaman fans on Earth. And even that movie, like anything that was promising or good in it, it's like it was hampered by the fact that, oh, this is just an adaptation of Aquaman.
I mean, hopefully the whole thing dies.
I'm just curious if like, go ahead.
It's really the whole kind of mainstream nerd culture, mainstream big budget action movie is just really boring. I mean, maybe I don't want to think of that I'm like some kind of elitist or something, because I really detest elitism, but I don't know. I don't feel like I'm the only one who's looking at all this stuff and going like, oh God, I'm so bored with all of this. I can't even remember the time that the last movie I really seen that was, well, I guess I can. The last Blade Runner movie was something that I saw and it kind of grabbed me as being something that kind of earned its own pretensions, earned its own. I mean, it was a sequel where there was sort of a reason to make a sequel in a lot of ways, and I thought that was well done enough. But I don't know. It just maybe I'm becoming a cantankerous old man, but
you're not becoming one. You've always been
there's just very little in any of this stuff that's interesting. I think that it sounds elitist, like, oh, we liked it before, it was cool, but there was something kind of fun about the supreme pulp nature of culture and before the late 90s, because you couldn't get it everywhere. So they were necessarily fringe communities.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, they were necessarily more interesting.
What examples do you have
of fringe?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, here's a classic example. If you look at the Eastman and Laird Ninja Turtles, those were like, before they got turned into the sort of like incredibly like mass-produced children's toys, they're kind of a darker comic.
Yeah.
And but there were a bunch of other ones in that whole era. The one that comes to mind right at this very moment is Cerebus, the Aardvark, who was an incredibly cynical take on religion. It started off as sort of a Conan the Barbarian thing, and then it became sort of a comic about really how the guy hated everything. The author hated religion, women. He felt kind of trapped by society, and I don't know. I mean, it was dark. It was interesting. You couldn't get it everywhere, and the sort of the fringe appeal, the sort of the appeal of this stuff was that you had to go out and seek out people who had a similar interest, and it wasn't so click a button, get an audience of 1 billion. 1 billion between here and China, which is what these franchises have become to a certain degree now. I don't think there's any way that anyone who's reasonably looking for something that is ideas based is ever going to find it in a movie like Avengers. I mean, I should say that it does come a little close. I was kind of surprised when I saw the end of Avengers just how much I kind of liked the Thanos character, how it kind of mirrored sort of the tragic Superman that you see in a lot of 19th century literature or even more ancient literature. But at the same time, that was basically as far as you could take it. It was this little, it wasn't even like they were really exploring that character. They were just using it as a backdrop. They passed you like 5 minutes of intellectually interesting concepts and then subjected you to 2 hours of like green and blue explosions with like one-liners. I mean, so it was altogether just not worth it.
Yeah. But just sort of a point I wanted to make is like the last really good movie I saw was the Alita Battle Angel movie. And I think it's,
I remember the anime.
Yeah. I need to see that because I heard that's good too. But it's like, first off, it was pretty interesting to see an anime adaptation that was actually good. But the other thing is that like you just had a huge backlash of like this little miniature culture war battle between that and Captain Marvel. Not even because Alita is like, I thought it was really good, but it was certainly not like the best movie I've ever seen. I think just a huge number of fans or people, young men, just wanted to see it because they saw it as sort of a contrast to Captain Marvel, wherein, the lead actress specifically said she didn't want people like them seeing her movie. And it's
I think it was and I haven't seen either of the movies, although I do know, judging from the trailer, it looks like Alita is a paint by numbers recreation of the anime. The Alita kind of tracks more into a Mary Sue archetype that's cuter and more feminine, and Captain Marvel's a Mary Sue archetype that is dissatisfied, feminist, and sort of
a bitchy white woman.
Yeah. I mean, so I can see how people like Alita more. I guess to me, I'm just kind of, that's kind of the I hope that's not the alternatives we're given, right?
Yeah, I get that.
Sort of like bubblegum pop, big-eyed cyborgs versus snarling feminist.
Now that would actually be a movie I'd want to see, is have those two characters fight each other.
Wow.
That's the real Batman versus Superman.
Well, I think that probably, I guess it would probably leave the Battle Angel Alita fans happy. But unless they joined in solidarity and became lovers or something like that, then they would probably leave the Captain Marvel fans happy. But I don't know. It's hard to know where this is going to go. I imagine eventually what will happen is I think then this is what's happening with The Last Jedi too, is you can sort of play the social justice game until it cuts in on your China profits, which is what the new Star Wars have been playing it so woke that it's cut in on their China profits,
Yeah,
and
it
I think
reminds me
you're
of
going to notice that. But then again, like, what are you going to? You're going to get this Transformers over and over again.
yeah, and that almost seems worse because as much as I despise progressivism, like there's at least something to be said when wherein they have some sort of something they believe is a higher ideal that they try and put in, as opposed to like I despise Michael Bay and I despise those movies. Actually,
Yeah,
I
The
think
Rock was good.
Hmm?
I said The Rock was good.
Well, The Rock is like the most likable. He's like the least easy. He's an impossible to hate person because of charisma, sort of like the modern Arnold Schwarzenegger, but without like the good movies that he's been in.
Mm-hmm.
But in any sense, it's like what was I thinking? Is I actually think my most hated filmmaker is by far Roland Emmerich.
Oh yeah, my wife was watching Independence Day
Everyone's like, "Oh,
a
this is a
few
great
weeks
movie."
ago.
That movie is crap. Everything he's
Well,
made
most
is
of the movies from the late '90s were really bad. After Jurassic Park, movie making took like this sudden downturn. It didn't even start turning up until The Matrix, which even The Matrix isn't
The Matrix
that
is
good of a movie.
yeah. I mean, the first
But
one's okay, but
it's just better than all the other ones that were out there at the time.
I think though I remember in college, my history professor he basically said like I have a personal vendetta against The Patriot. He's like considers that the worst movie ever made.
That was pretty bad. Although that was I mean, what are we comparing it to, right?
Glory?
You mean like the one from the '80s?
The one with Matthew Broderick. The one
Yeah,
about
wasn't that from the '80s?
No, that's from the 90s.
Oh, it is from the '90s.
I think so. Let me look it up.
Well, at any rate, sure, but it's well, I guess I don't know.
Oh yeah, it was the 80s. It was 1989. Anyway,
Okay, so it's just that was neither here nor there. But what I guess there are always eras in movies that are really, really terrible because of how the studio system works. And I'm not so sure if we're entering one of those eras now. It seems not unlikely. But to me, I think the thing is I'd take I would take an era of bad popcorn movies if I could also have a thriving independent film industry.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
I think
that's something I will sort of give props to the video game industry for over film and television is the fact that compared to those industries, for video games, the barrier to entry is a lot lower and and that barrier has been getting lower and lower, for years now, to the point where you can have somebody like the guy that made Undertale or the guy that made Stardew Valley, just like one person teams make these just breakout games that sell more than AAA titles.
Mm-hmm.
And that go ahead.
No, I'll take your word for it because I haven't really been connected into video games. I guess the problem with video games is always, and I know I've said this to you before, it's always incredibly difficult to share something that you've seen or an experience in a video game to somebody intergenerationally. That's just a huge problem with them as a medium. I don't know if it's something that can be really easily solved or not, but
maybe as the industry gets older and older.
Yeah, hopefully.
Though my problem is, I've noticed this, and I think it was epitomized in the Adam Sandler movie Pixels, is that it seems like older Gen X and the people that first started playing video games, and I noticed this too when I look back at some stand-up comedians, wherein they don't, anytime they make a joke about video games, it seems like they don't think any video games were ever made after 1989. Because like they can name the original Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers, they don't think anything came out after that.
Well, I mean, if you talk to me, I probably wouldn't be able to name you very many video games that came out after 2012, right? And this is just naturally happens as you get less time to play video games, and so the language that you have. I mean, I never heard of Stardew Valley.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen people do Let's Play. I haven't seen them do Let's Plays because I don't watch Let's Plays. But the only reason why I know it is because YouTubers that I do respect play it a lot. But so this is just going to be a generational language thing, and I guess the thing is that our art is only become sort of truly great when it can kind of span generations. For instance, Star Wars is, I mean, I think you probably say that's very definitively part of your culture, but it wasn't part of your generation.
Well, interestingly enough, like I agree with you there, and I think it was an interesting side note is people my age and older, like anybody probably younger than their mid-20s, even the original Star Wars trilogy, they don't actually get to really enjoy it because the special editions have like sort of have sullied the original experience, whereas we just managed to sneak get my parents managed to just get the the special like release of the VHS tapes right before that ended. So,
are there not the original? Did Disney not release the original?
No, they haven't done. I at this point, I'm thinking either they're gonna like release all 9 movies, including like the original release of the first 3 films, like after this one's out, so they can have like a whole 9 movie box set they can sell for $300, or George Lucas destroyed them or has the rights to them and doesn't want to give them up because he's a bizarre weirdo.
I would imagine it's the former. I can't imagine Disney doesn't realize how much money it would make selling the originals, the theatrical versions. Maybe I'm wrong, but
I sort of hope so because again, those movies are wonderful, but it's the originals. But the other thing, what's fascinating is that like I watched the Red Letter Media. They did a commentary track on Return of the Jedi and just pointed out, not just because of the special edition, but, the sort of inherent problems with that movie. And it's just like they remark just how much the entire Star Wars saga is held up by one single movie, which it's held up by Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, although I would say that the first one was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Empire Strikes Back made it into some kind of cultural phenomenon where people thought it was like somehow, it sort of developed Shakespearean elements to it.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I mean, the question is if you're looking for intergenerational culture, it's hard to know exactly where to look. And in some ways, video games seem like the worst place to look.
I can see that.
Like that's one of the reasons why when we're having these conversations about like culture and what's good and what's not, I always shy away from going like, oh yeah, video games or the new art, because in the back of my mind I'm always thinking like, okay, so I play a good video game. How do I share this with my parents?
Though in a way, I think with older video games, there's some of that because somebody can like. Some people may be a little younger than me, or I know my dad loved the original Tetris, and like that has intergenerational appeal because Tetris has been around. But
I mean, classically though, Tetris are like fall into the category of true games, right?
Yes.
So it's like it starts becoming like, well, sure, Parcheesi is a classic game, but like, how many times have been like, oh yeah, Parcheesi changed my life? Like,
yeah, I do think though maybe a counterpoint is can't aspects of game design itself be considered art?
Well, I'm sure they're artistic. Obviously, there are some things. It just is something. I mean, what do you mean by art? I guess would be my response to that.
For me, I just consider any creative work to be art. I just consider there is such a thing as terrible art.
But I mean, that if every creative work is art, then certain mediums need to be recognized as having certain limitations to them.
Yes.
I think that's kind of what a lot of people struggle with video games is they keep on wanting them to mean the same thing as books or movies. And I just don't think that they can sustain that in the same way. Or if they can sustain that in the same way. I don't know. I mean, people who play more video games can explain that. But, and this is, I don't think that Game of Thrones or the Marvel movies, maybe the Marvel movies people are going to treat intergenerationally. I just don't think it's going to have a lot of staying power or a lot of ability to communicate a lot of stuff. That's just my very biased impression.
Because, especially with Game of Thrones, the fact that there was, like, I think it's also going to come across as extremely dated in 20 years. Or in the fact, or a lot of this is because, like, I mean, what's occurred to me, and it's like the last video I made was on I watched the first 5 episodes of the series Designated Survivor that came out a few years ago, and I guess it's on Netflix now. And it's like, because I haven't watched anything that wasn't like an anime or like a really old TV series from the 70s, or like I hadn't watched like a proper modern TV show in a while. And I was like, oh, this might be a hidden gem because it's an interesting premise wherein, if like during the State of the Union, everybody in the Supreme, like a bomb goes off in the Capitol building, and the president, vice president, speaker, every member of Congress, and like the Supreme Court is all wiped out in one night. And so just like a minor, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development is like the designated survivor who was put in a bunker beforehand just in case. And now he becomes president and has to deal with things. But just like the sheer amount of just SJW politics that was shoved in, like my mouth dropped to the floor because like when literally
were you surprised? I guess
I wasn't
kind of what I
surprised
wanted
by how blatant it was. I wasn't ready. Like this first or second episode shows the governor of Michigan, because apparently governors have the power to just act like dictators and order the police to do whatever they want. Has the police just start arresting all Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan. And like the first lady, and then the first lady is of course trying to help out an illegal immigrant mother, because of course the first lady's priority should be taking illegal action to aid and abet criminals.
Yeah, I mean,
and like I guess like because like they initially think, oh, it's like the perpetrator was like an Islamic terrorist group in North Africa, and they think they got it, but like it's explicitly
almost Republicans.
No, apparently that's what it really is in the end.
Yeah, of course it is. Like I as soon as I saw that, like I knew that it was like the Republicans secretly doing it. They have had. They're not only before that, they were like White House Down and Olympus Has Fallen.
Yeah,
both had movies where like they killed a president, and it's like the Republicans are the evil people. Like it's so predictable. There have been so many movies like this, and I can't imagine that even people who agree with this politics are going to be really impressed with this. It doesn't. I mean, it's not particularly interesting, I guess.
And that's just sort of why I'm just trying to seek out things that are weird and bizarre enough, because I'll take things that are at least unpredictable, which is why I think I really want to get into some of the John Carpenter movies, like The Thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've seen The Thing, right?
I've never seen it, actually. I saw the first. I had like a digital version of it, but like I could either watch it in 720 and with good sound, or in 1080 and the voices were extremely quiet. So I think I'm just going to be a good boy and actually just buy the Blu-ray on Amazon.
Well, yeah, the practical effects certainly are groundbreaking. Mm-hmm. I'm a little less impressed with the characters, but
you don't like Kurt Russell?
Well, as an actor, I mean, here's the challenge. Like, can anyone remember what his character was named?
Oh,
not just the Kurt Russell character.
Yeah, that's true, but
no one can. But I'm sure some people can. That's not an actual challenge.
But
go ahead. Well, I was going to say there's a lot of interesting things if you go into fringe and pulp cinema.
That
there
is
was a whole history of this before the times that we're in, where liberal politics became mainstream, and it's less political than a lot of the stuff that we're used to seeing in our modern times.
I even think that or at least what I've seen from the George Romero zombie movies, you can even, I mean, there's politics in there. Like, I think like I've seen like in the original Night of the Living Dead, like a lot of the footage looks very much like stuff you'd see, like 1960s race riots. Like the main character is an African American, but it's like it's subtle enough that it's clearly not like over the top or anything. And like Dawn of the Dead is sort of critiquing mass consumerism, so it's like set in a mall when like the zombies are still just sort of acting like the people walking around the mall. But yeah, like
And there's a whole history of reactionary fiction. If you go back, if you're interested in stuff that's explicitly right wing, there were numerous pulp authors that were conservative, reactionary, and brought that perspective into their work. Not that I really go seeking it out, but I mean that world is available. The only question is, at what point do people of our generation get tired of just consuming this stuff and try to create a new scene for
and I think that's like the response to, like, there's tons and tons of like old movies, books, and works of culture that are far more edifying than we have now. But like, you're right, at some point you do have to seek out good things that are out there now, or like help support, or I mean, at least check out things that are new. That's why I really like Leica Studios. They just do like a lot of they're sort of like bringing back stop motion animation in these absolutely gorgeous looking movies. And even though their latest one, somebody actually just posted, Kyle posted $5 saying, "Game designer here. I wouldn't call games art. They're worlds. We can experience new forms of art within the environments, and the interactions are the art." Do you have any thoughts on that?
Good enough. Well, I think that's fair. I mean, certainly it's a more efficient medium to experience a world.
Mm-hmm. I think the only sort of caveat I would add to it is that, as fun as I do love like exploration in games, but I think the problem is like can come in, and I mentioned this in my fantasy video, that if you put way too much stock on the world and just say like, well, because like anybody that tries to write like fantasy or science fiction, it seems like the easiest part is coming up with the lore and the backstory to everything.
It is by far, it is the easiest thing, and it's one of the main mistakes that people make when they do this stuff. They think that it's really important somehow to get a world, and it's kind of not. I mean, I guess it's good enough if I guess it just depends what you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, though, even then, like there, like a certain in certain ways, like you can like take a really interesting turn on it, or like what I'm thinking of is in the Elder Scrolls games, like the Skyrim and Oblivion and whatnot. Is the thing I actually like is how they sort of twist it, and they make the dwarves, or they're called the Dwemer. They're sort of like the elves of that universe, but wherein they're essentially like a highly advanced technologically advanced race that went extinct, as opposed to the elves, who are basically, they essentially are like the caricatures of Jews, in the sense that they're manipulating everything. Well, I think I should like to make a video, because like in sort of the generic fantasy canon, it seems like people get dwarves and elves sort of reverse in terms of what they feel about them, because after or outside of the Tolkien canon, wherein in Tolkien, he got elves right because he understood to make them basically like ethereal, angelic, almost, sort of, otherworldly, and just filled with tons and tons of, grace and just high culture. But like, it seems like in every other fantasy work, they just come across as like elitist dicks.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've said this before on many live streams. I think the Tolkien fantasy stuff is sort of played out. Yeah. I think that I think we need to start going back to much older sources to draw inspiration and try to build something new.
Sort of,
and
like
there's just no way. I always want to say this. There's just no way that we're going to get around building something new out of this, right? It's not. We can't just expect that. We can't. Complaining about Hollywood's stance on this is not going to make a hill of beans difference, because we're not the demo. We're not the demo they're interested in anymore.
And we don't have any power either.
Yeah, we're not the demo. We're not their target demo. And so we can complain about that as much as we want to. It's not going to change anything. So I think that this is something that we're people of, young white men, I won't mince my words, are going to have to come to the conclusion that if they want to have challenging intellectual fare that's targeted towards their worldview, they're going to have to belly up the bar and make it.
Yeah. I mean, I think science fiction has a lot more promise because it seems a lot more open-ended.
Well, science fiction, fantasy, whatever. I mean, let's not pick the best genre. I mean, it's I can think of good fantasy, I can think of good science fiction, right? I mean, when people were sitting down and writing poetry, they weren't like, well, prose is better than poetry because this. Well,
okay.
I don't know. I guess I don't. If you've got a poem and you write a poem, don't worry that prose is somehow better.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least that would be my advice, I guess, right? Writing is very difficult, creating is very difficult, but there's no, and we can do criticism. I mean, the problem is that criticism is about an audience, and so what's your audience for criticism? I don't know if reactionary men want to write criticism that mainly appeals to other reactionary men. I'm not so sure they really will have done anything that significant.
And I think that, as much as like YouTube, like critics and analysts and like, people taking, say, games, movies, whatever, very in depth, I certainly like that as opposed to just sort of the wacky, just completely surface level shills that, praise every game that's mainstream. But like, there does need to be creative work as opposed to just critique.
Yeah, and that's one thing that there's a very difficult thing. This is one reason why progressive critics, their audience is bigger, and it's also the audience of their criticism is also the same ideological audience as the people who are making the movies. But if you're a reactionary critic, it's like, your audience isn't the people who are making the movies. So it just, you start thinking like, okay, so, they don't care and we're not their demo. So, at the end of the day, what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm. But another thing, like, because like piecing together or putting together like something like that, or like a Designated Survivor, or I at the same time I tried watching Man the High Castle,
Mm-hmm.
and like that, and I guess like how Game of Thrones took a half step towards democracy by having an elective monarchy. It seems
so stupid.
I mean, like, there is at least. I do have to answer this. What somebody said: why did I leave Orthodox Christianity? I never joined it. I attended an Orthodox church a few times. I enjoyed it, but theologically, I decided to go with the Catholic Church. But it seems like, I guess, like, from what I've gathered, or what seems to be implied in Man the High Castle, is that it's more just like, people can completely correct me if I'm wrong on this, but that's like, it's really just like it's like an alternate universe, and that I guess the Man in the High Castle has access to our universe where, like the Nazis lost. So like there, and like in every situation, like whereas in Designated Survivor, if this actually happened, you probably would have to have a massive restructuring of how government works, because in one instance,
I mean, if the Republicans were planning a coup,
I don't. Well, it'd be odd to do that since all the Republicans congressmen also got killed. But my point being that, like, it seems like there always has to be a return to a status quo that's some form of liberal democracy.
Well, you're talking about among the things that are produced by center-left progressives.
Yes, I mean, it's no surprise
by that. To tell you the truth. I mean, there was a norm of returning to the status quo even before the era of wokeness, and I'd be amazed if that led up during the era of wokeness.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm afraid
we're going to make Westeros into the United States of Westeros.
I mean, I checked out of that, caring about that in season 7. I almost now feel kind of ashamed that I got caught up in all of this stuff. It's kind of, It's kind of embarrassing. It's all of this fluff, and it doesn't mean anything. I don't know. I'm trying to read more and find some gems among the rough. The problem is I feel that indie movies just aren't as interesting as they used to be. I don't see when I was a teenager, we used to be really into movies like Naked Lunch and Eraserhead and all of these strange, like Six String Samurai and all of these strange movies that you could find in the back of your video store, and now it just looks like I haven't seen a really good movie like that in a long time.
Because I think isn't a lot of it just sort of becomes Oscar bait now?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Maybe there's a thriving indie movie scene. I'm just not aware of it.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like, it just seems like because of maybe this could be in part responsible is the fact that there is very little to actually push back against now in terms of social values.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody's impressed if you're like, well, being gay is fine, or what if like you make an independent movie about that, because that's something that's as we saw during Mental Illness Awareness Month, Gay Pride Month last year, last month, is every company and their mother is full on the rainbow bandwagon.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there was ever. It didn't. I don't think the indie video game, did I say video games? I don't think the indie scene was ever that much about gay and lesbian stuff. That was always
just an example of being at least some
sure.
Like countercultural attitudes being at least part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody, Drunken Warlock, that's a pretty good name, said the last great decade for movies was the 80s. There was some good stuff out of the 90s, but Jurassic Park, but you do have a point that things in the 80s, it seems like, especially with, I think my favorite films from the 80s, like the big budget blockbuster, is Back to the Future, which is somehow both sort of, it's still timeless and enjoyable now. It doesn't feel dated. And at the same time, it feels so of its era that it's very endearing. Whereas it seems like so many movies that came out of the 90s are just feel so dated and loud and just, have aged horribly.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. I don't know. It's something that we're going to have to come to terms with as a culture. And like I said, I would never watch another mainstream movie again if I could find a thriving independent art scene that was somewhat sympathetic to my worldview.
Yeah. And I think that's another problem that people on the right really have to get past, is the fact that you can't just make conservative movies because they all just seem to be outright propaganda. And it's like the left clearly, after decades and decades, knew how to, I guess now it's finally unraveling where they have to make it just so prevalent. But they managed to actually make a good movie at the same time. Whereas I could never watch any of those quote unquote Christian movies outside of Risen was pretty good. But the God's Not Dead things, I think, has set evangelical Christianity back years.
I guess. See, that was never really, conservatives in my area don't make things like that. They just don't talk at all. It's, I guess that's a lesson probably that should be taken to evangelicals. It just, from my point of view, it seems a little less, the problem seems less that and more just a question, not creating anything at all. And that's kind of where my frustration is just seeing all of the things that have kind of been left by the wayside. I don't know.
What was that? What else was I going to say? Sorry. Should have written some notes for this, but I know. Is there anything you're looking forward to, or anything in the
well, in pop culture? I if you're talking about pop culture, I don't consume any pop culture.
Yeah, I mean anything, any culture, new or old.
I'm reading some books now. Obviously, I'm almost done with War and Peace. That took me a long time. I'm reading Revolt Against the Modern World, which is Julius Evola, and I'm finishing off some nonfiction books. I actually read through Peter Kropotkin's The Conquest of Bread, which is really terrible. But
Can you give a summary of that? Because I've heard you talk a lot
it's
about
just so it's the book that every leftist pretends they've read on the communist side. It's just communist claptrap. Everyone should have everything, and if you disagree, you're a terrible person.
I think you made a great rebuttal where you should write the book. The Christian book is called The Bread of Conquest.
Yeah, I am working on an essay to that extent, but I'm grown very weary of promising things. I have a very consistent rate of content production, which I'm happy about. But the problem is that no matter how content you are, how kind of constant your rate of production is, your ability to promise things is always 10 times faster.
Yeah.
And so I've become very wary of promising things that I can't deliver.
Yeah, I keep forgetting to forgetting to not do that sometimes, because it's like I wanted to do a review of an anime that I had seen, but it's like I had like 2 or 3 sentences or like 1 or 2 points that I could make on it. It's like I could not make even like a 5-minute video because I only had a few things that I actually thought were interesting in it. Mm-hmm. But in any case, like something I would like to do. I had this idea before. I know this sounds like I'm promising things, but it's something I'd like to explore. Is like I really want to get into like the classic sort of 50s and 60s Sword and Sandal movies. Like we watched a little bit of Quo Vadis. What?
Like The Robe.
Like The Robe, like Quo Vadis. So like I don't know. Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hur is by far the best one.
Yeah, I people might hate that. 80-year-olds might hate this, but I think Spartacus is overrated, and I think Kirk Douglas is overrated. Like, I don't know what it is, but I've never liked him in any movie he's in.
I don't know any big Kirk Douglas fans, but I've never been a huge Kirk Douglas fan, and I barely even remember Spartacus, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I originally when Blockbuster still existed, there was a thing called Blockbuster Kiddos where you could rent videos, and we had seen, or I think in school or something, we had seen part of Ben-Hur. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And you heard like, whoa, wait, Jesus is in this movie? Cool. And then I'm like, oh, I got that confused with Spartacus. I'm like, this movie's boring. Because I was like 10.
What was Spartacus boring? I can barely
No,
remember.
but I was 10.
Okay. Well, I mean, there you go. I mean,
I mean, like, I'm wondering if like the film Titus could be part of it, could be included, because I love that movie because it, as you pointed out, or as I think as Argent would say, it's based as fuck.
Titus Andronicus is. I plan to do one of the Trad Codex series, of which I'm probably going to release the next installment tomorrow. I'm doing it on the BioShock Infinite, The Secret Garden, and Alice in Wonderland. And that's kind of interesting. It's very interesting going back and kind of doing an autobiography of the things that influenced you. You come to I find, at least for myself, it brings about a lot of interesting revelations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I remember when it was like something I'd love to do would be on Quo Vadis, because we watched part of it in my Latin class in college. I was like, this is sort of awesome, because it's something I sort of appreciate. And I think the movie 10 Commandments, was that 1954? It was definitely in the 50s, really got this. Was like movies of that caliber just seem to have a big emphasis on sort of spectacle, like treating it both not just as a film, but also almost like as a stage play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the big biblical stories were huge spectacles, right? Mm-hmm. I think the problem is I think that the 1950s to many Christians lulled them into a false sense of security that essentially it was Hollywood's job to create product that would be comforting to them, and I think that they never really understood the cultural position that they hadn't really changed. And I'm always very aware of that, which is why, you know, if you ask me if like a Christian movie that's my personal favorite, I go back to the 20s and The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is my personal favorite still, and it still plays well to secular audiences, which I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, I don't know. I think that I had something to say, and then I kind of lost my train of thought. I think that as far as we're going culturally, I'm kind of optimistic that people are going to kind of try to think in new directions. I don't know if what your general take on it.
I mean, I was just about to say that it seems like we're now in reverse positions because you're sort of the eternal pessimist, but like I sort of am a bit pessimistic because I think that probably in the coming years after the Rise of Skywalker, yes, I can't even believe that they came up with that title for the last Star Wars movie. It's like, what the hell does that even mean? But is that like they're gonna find something, and I tend to think a lot of movie-going audiences are very stupid, and and it does sound elitist, but
are you waiting for mainstream pop culture to get better? I mean, I guess this is sort of
I'm not waiting for it to get better. I'm just waiting. I'm not waiting for it to get better. I'm waiting for it to essentially collapse. But
I think it already has, insofar as it can collapse. Like I think that the thing is that like we just have to we have to kind of accustom ourselves to mainstream pop culture not being really for us. This is one thing I totally agree with Brie Larson, and people should have listened to her when she said this. When she said, "My movie is not for you," we should have listened to her.
Yes,
understood that her movie is not for us,
and essentially say, "Okay, then we're not going to go see it."
Yeah. Absolutely. Why didn't anyone say that? But no one did say that. People saw her say that. Actually, and then she said that about A Wrinkle of Time, which is kind of weird because A Wrinkle in Time, pardon me, was a movie that I have very fond memories of. It's kind of weirdly comes from this mainline Christianity that no longer really exists. But it is quite an interesting piece of art in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And but when that's the implicit message that people are giving us is our movies aren't for you,
but you'll still come to see them anyway.
You'll still come to see them. No, just don't organize your life around critiquing them either. I mean, that's just. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, that's in many ways what I find kind of depressing a little bit is that when people like The Quartering. The Quartering is someone who essentially got snubbed by Wizards of the Coast, and Wizards of the Coast. I have a nerd confession. I like nerdy card games, you know, but this is not an uncommon complaint that Wizards of the Coast is a really bad actor. But he keeps on just complaining about them. I mean, like, okay, fine. Like, what is the equivalent of what is the way to get around having to deal with this company? Why keep on shoveling them money? Just complain about it. I don't get it, I guess.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's like I remember like when I was watching the sort of reviews of The Last Jedi, there was a channel called Dishonored Wolf, and just like it just felt a little pathetic, like him screaming how Star Wars was my life, and you know, it's like Star Wars was so important to me, and just like screaming about how bad the movie was. Where it's like I can totally understand that, you know, movies and culture can impact people, but it's like why like at the end of the day, it's still like, why would you base your identity or something on like Star Wars?
Maybe it was, you know, his life in a lot of ways.
In a way, that's interesting, but I don't know. I just don't see like why I would make Star Wars my life, says the guy that's a weeb, but.
Well, I mean, people do base their life around culture. And this is something that I think that I don't feel like we've properly come to terms with this yet. I know we've passed scorn on this, but no one's really come to terms with the fact that people do organize their life around culture, like it or not. Mm-hmm. And so I think the question is just, The question is just, what culture are we going to organize it around? I just can't believe that we're still kind of like having to recast this this thing. We're having to continuously refight these battles. Mm-hmm. We're not refight the battles, but we're not getting over. We're not getting over any of this stuff.
We're not accepting that the progressives and people that despise a lot of the core audience of these movies, they're not budging and they're going to keep making them.
Yeah, of course they're going to keep on making them.
They make money.
Yeah, they make money in China. And what's the only thing worse than, being totally stuck in this sort of pop culture dynamic is a pop culture that's is basically doing the same thing and then basically sticking with it after it's already said, don't watch me. Yeah.
And it's like, especially with the China thing, is the fact it's not only is like, are these movies not made for, Western male audiences or just Western audiences? Not just saying like, oh, this isn't made for straight white males anymore. These aren't even made for Western audiences anymore. Mm-hmm. And part of that sort of contributes to why the plots are so stupid because, translation because of translation and, cultural and just linguistic translation, they can't make a very complicated plot if they want to sell it in China.
Yeah.
Now I just keep getting Argent Templar's China Economy Strong song in my head. Wow. I love those videos.
Well, we have very different tastes in videos then.
That's fine.
Yeah, I know it's fine. I mean, there's room for a lot of different people on the various sides of the internet for sure. And
they all hate each other.
Yeah, well, that's how it goes, I guess. But I'm myself, I'm kind of I guess I kind of feel cautiously optimistic. I don't know. It's hard to say about any of this stuff. Sometimes it feels like people are going to kind of wake up. They're not going to kind of play ball with this stuff anymore. But I don't know. Then other times it just feels like we're kind of stuck in this cycle again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. Because it's sort of like the NPC meme, wherein, like, again, to go back to Argent, but it like he pointed out, like, if you just tried and like said, hey, I think there's something slightly, more intellectual or interesting about this Avengers movies, people will just look at you like a deer caught in headlights. Like, they'll just be confused because, like, I guess he said, like, a large number of people just cannot grasp, abstract concepts.
No, but I mean, more interesting than that is the question about, like, well, is that really the template you even want to be having this conversation in? Like, the Avengers movie is going to be our template for having, like, guess what? There are deep things in this world. I don't know, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you ask Eve Kaninen, she like loves superhero movies, but so you can ask her. But
well, sure. I mean, it just, to me, I'm really not there, I guess. To me, I feel that I just want to get over this period of our. I mean, I love pulp novels. It's just this it's this mass market that goes to China stuff. It can't do anything. It can only almost do something cool. It can never actually do something that surprises you, because the second it does something that surprises you to the extent that it would offend a social media monitor in China, like the people who create the social media networks in China, like we said, that's Orwellian and all that stuff. Like, oh, how could they this? But that's going to be controlling our ability to consume art. That it has to, because it has to be able to control our ability to consume art, because now that social media network, if it goes off, if watching a movie becomes like a hit against it, then nobody in America is going to produce that movie. And through corporate sacrifice, you're going to essentially get the same bland
action movie.
Yeah, since the market drives movies here, and the market is being controlled by China's social network, your ability to do anything is going to be completely constrained by it's not the Politburo, but the Chinese Communist Party.
Isn't that wonderful? So basically, what you're saying is, I think this was they were talking a little bit about this on Red Letter Media, and they said, so you're saying Hollywood is filled with like something like perverts and traitors?
In a sense, yeah. I mean, it's and I also know we need to get away from the mainstream. I mean, I feel like a broken record, but that's just it. We need to. I don't have any more, and I know in my latest Trad Codus, I do critique a modern movie, but at the same time, I kind of hope that the critique is something that's more than just a complaint about modern pop culture, and is going to be focused on actually some kind of truth that lies behind the original art that I'm critiquing, that I'm referring to. Say, for instance, the Burnett's A Secret Garden, which is one of my favorite childhood books. Mm-hmm. And that will hopefully get somewhere. I want to eventually go to more recent fare, but I have to say I haven't been. I would really like to find something that's more recent that people actually like, and that people think is good, because I'm kind of at this point. You ask me like what's new in terms of my media consumption. To be quite honest, it's all really old. It's all from the 90s and before, mm-hmm. Which I don't like at all. I don't read older stuff because I'm a snob. I read older stuff because it's the only stuff that's at all kind of tolerable, to be quite honest.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like, no, I'm trying to. I mean, I don't disagree with any of that, so it's sort of hard to follow that up with. But I mean, we can wrap up soon. But
no, I mean, whatever.
I didn't intend for this to be a long stream, but I'm thinking is like I'm just curious, like what franchises is. Although even then, it's not really that interesting to think of like, oh, what are they going to try and ape off of next? Because like. And I think maybe you're right that there is cause for some hope, because like I think already like the live action adaptations that Disney keeps making of like their beloved animation franchises, like The Lion King is going to bomb, and the little now apparently Black Mermaid is going to bomb, because somebody made an interesting point that it seems like every time they race change or they're going to do a live action adaptation with a red-haired character, they always make them black.
Yeah, that's interesting, but I want to emphasize one thing. Like, let's not sit around, like, rubbing our hands together, waiting for Disney to fail just so it can come crawling back to us and go, oh, I'm sorry, white middle-class America. We'll start making things that idolize you again. Just like we did in the 90s. Don't wait around for that. That will
I'm not waiting around for that. I'm waiting around for
so the question is, if you're not waiting around for Disney to fail, then what are you waiting around to find? That's the proper question, right? What new things are we waiting around to actually crack open? How are we hoping that our enemies are going to fail? The Hollywood media is never going to crawl back to white middle class America and ask that. They're no longer its demo.
Yeah. Their demo is Chinese.
Their demo is Chinese and who they actually are, which is middle globalist progressive shitless.
I thought you were going to say they're just Jews, but
maybe you can get away saying that on your channel.
I don't know what it is, but it's like smaller like Twitter accounts and channels. Like I don't know what it is, but I seem to be like immune, because like the most trouble I've ever gotten in was I just tweeted at Ben Shapiro and Guy Benson. I said, Guy Benson, stop being a sodomite. So me criticizing a gay quote unquote conservative, that's what made Twitter mad. Like I have some sort of magic immunity that I can say whatever I want, and the censors have left me alone so far.
If you're actually wondering what new thing that I'm looking forward to, it actually is the federation of social media, where we just go to like common sockets and everyone gets on sort of the same forum, a little bit like email services. So social media networks can kind of link up with each other so that we break the mold of Facebook and Twitter and go to that new, more open system. I think progressives have been a little bit ahead of us because they've pioneered. I mean, they didn't make the technology, but they have the biggest one right now, which is Mastodon. But Gab just got on that framework, and it's really, really interesting things that people can be doing in technology. I think that's a huge thing that we can look forward to.
Could you sort of elaborate on that? Because I actually have never heard of Mastodon.
Well, it's Mastodon is it's a progressives only social media, which is why probably no one who doesn't watch BreadTube hasn't heard of it. But it operates on a sort of a federated common platform. So you know how there's like Popmail, well, maybe you don't, but there's services that exist inside your email service that all communicate to each other, right? Okay. So that you don't have to have a Gmail account to send Gmail to people who are
use Yahoo or something.
Use Yahoo or exactly, yes. And so people have been talking about coming to a common framework, and there are these federated common frameworks that Mastodon was based on, and Gab has switched over to the same one. So what we could see is we could be entering sort of the golden age of diverse social media networks, such that we don't have to be reliant on the tyranny of Facebook and Twitter. This is something that I've been kind of thinking a lot about. I've been thinking about, okay, I want to find fellow reactionaries inside Northern California. How do I organize them? Like, I guess I'm stuck using Facebook. Not that I want to be, but that pretty much is it, right?
And then when it comes to like alternative media or alternative social media sites, I think not just saying, oh, we're pro free speech or something like that. I think one thing that they could be really selling themselves on, and I think any reactionary technology could just be, not stealing and using your data, because I think that and the whole privacy thing. I think because to me, like, Facebook is terrifying, not just because of the progressive bend. It's just the fact that you're stealing, like, everything like steals your data.
Data control could be something that I don't know if Gab does that or not, if it has a data control privacy. I know Brave does. Brave is an excellent piece of alternative technology. Brave is probably the only piece of alternative tech that I've really seen and gone like, that's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly what I thought. That's exactly the thing Brendan Eich should have done after he got kicked out of Mozilla, and he did it. And it's a great browser. It doesn't have the best support ever, as you'd expect for a new browser.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that
Brendan Eich helped start Brave.
Brendan Eich is the founder of Brave.
Okay.
I believe he is. It being a Silicon Valley company, I was looking through, since I used to be sort of a contributor, and I was on the list for like debugging and stuff like that. I was looking through their staff, and it's everyone has purple hair because it's in San Francisco, obviously. So I'm like, okay, well. At least I know everyone's on board with religious liberty, otherwise they wouldn't be working for Brendan Eich. Which is good enough. Which is good enough for the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. But I think the difficulty, and this is true for a lot of reactionary circles, is just the fact that we don't have a big enough weight in the creative sphere to force anyone to need to seek us out. And not that I think that BreadTube has this great creative influence, but what it has is the politics that is marginally more sympathetic to the people who are mainly creative. And this is something that the reactionary and right-wing community really need to work on. We need to work on having reactionary communities that live a little bit closer to huge intellectual epicenters, or that it can at least make it comfortable to live in those epicenters as people who are explicitly ideologically to the right and hopefully the distant right. And I think if that happens, you could see things turning around. Mm-hmm. But at this stage, the problem is just there's just not the creative energy, there's sort of a deficit here that if you go to any sort of creative person, you can be pretty much assured that they're progressive. And as politics starts seeping more and more into every creative piece of art, well, arguably it's getting worse, but it's still, even the stuff that's new that is around there is very decidedly progressive in its orientation.
And I think this is something I thought about. I cannot be the first. I think I just got it from general cult osmosis from these circles. Is that perhaps one of the greatest weapons the left has in terms of sort of beating down sort of mainstream society or just ordinary people is the fact that everything is political. That culture, your relationships, your workplace, everything has to have some sort of politics injected into it. Nothing can be. Politics can no longer just be, or at least ideology can no longer just be sort of, implicit or just be sort of subtle or subtext or reflect sort of the creator.
That's actually interesting you say that, because I don't think the way that conservatives present this, the conservative presents this as if the politicization of everything is something that the progressives did. But actually, the politicization is what humans naturally do when they're thrown into a culturally chaotic sphere, where it's not clear what's the dominant culture. And we should have expected the politicization of everything in the left, just knowing the demographic and cultural trends that had been going on since the early 60s. The fact that conservatives are totally unprepared for the politicization is really a testament to their own lack of foresight. And so I wouldn't expect, we need to thrive in an era where everything is political. Don't expect this isn't going to go away. This is the new norm until the culture of the West stabilizes, if ever. Yeah, obviously it will stabilize at one point, or the human race will go extinct. But if ever in our lifetimes, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's going to be an interesting thing to take on. I don't think we can run from politics ever, and if we have to develop, if we have to politicize things, I mean, what would be kind of interesting is politicizing something like pulp, right? Which is really easy to do, and sort of like turning that into a genre, a creative genre. I mean, for instance, what if there was so what's that website SCP like?
The one where SCP containment unit, where it's like a community created controlled like thing where they sort of have invent like phenomena.
Wiki, right? It's like a fiction wiki.
Yeah,
it's like a community project where everyone's participating in the same world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is something, and this has obviously got cucked the hell out. I mean, I don't use I like the word cuck, but everyone knows what happened to it, right? When it got woke, it didn't go broke, and now a lot of people are pissed off at it. But I was seeing SCP, the website, and I'm like, well, this would just be perfect. This would be perfect if you had, because do you know what else was sort of like paint by numbers, but like that kind of fanfic tier writing was pulp. And pulp is sort of like fundamentally reactionary. And
could you just find pulp a little more?
Pulp is, well, I mean, pulp just means cheap. It's like the paper that it's published on. But it was usually when people talk about pulp, they mean the pulp fiction that came out between the end of World War I, or in some cases, between the beginning of the 20th century and 1960. And pulp novels were characterized by very basic stories that had sort of torrid, easy to follow plots, but nonetheless had this kind of gripping tone to them, and were very atmospheric.
There's things like the guy that made Solomon Kane and Red Sonja and Conan, right?
Well, all the same person, Robert.
Yeah, I know they're the same person.
Howard, that's it, Robert E. Howard.
Yep.
And his, another contemporary him, and also pulp writer H.P. Lovecraft. There was also Edward Rice Burroughs, isn't he the guy who did Tarzan? There's numerous ones of these things. There were numerous detective genres that came up under these things.
Sort of film noir-esque.
Film noir-esque, yes. Some of them kind of deigned to become more than that, and some of them never did. But almost all of this stuff is thoroughgoingly right-wing in its worldview, and because the fictional style is so basic, there's such an opportunity to create sort of like a fan fiction project that could allow new people to write pulp fiction inside a collective online setting. And I've always wondered why people didn't look into that more. I mean, what if people talk about, okay, the problems with creating worlds, but if you're just writing pulp, it's actually not that hard to write a pulp story, and they're usually really fun, right? And so if you have the basic rules of how to write something for a collective fiction like SCP had, maybe something like that would work.
Mm-hmm. I think the other problem, and I think the fact that everybody now has to point out that people still love. I think it's interesting that people still recognize the merits of H.P. Lovecraft, but then they always have to say, "Oh, he's an evil racist." I think it's sort of an opportunity for the right to just say, "So what?"
I did an entire hour and a half video on that.
I know I forgot. I haven't watched it. I'm sorry.
I think you're preaching to the choir on that one.
You're preaching to the choir director or the composer.
Yeah, well, I certainly didn't. I'm certainly not the first person to do that. If no one else, Jonathan Bowden pointed out. Just Jonathan Bowden, who is a reactionary. Originally, he was strangely enough, he was affiliated. I mean, he was someone that Richard Spencer discovered. Back when Richard Spencer wasn't the biggest douchebag who ever lived, and he gave a number of lectures on various different thinkers and fiction writers who contained what he considered to have core right-wing themes in them. And H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard were certainly one of the most prominent ones. Another thing that came up with Punch and Judy. He did a good talk on that. And these things are there. And I don't agree with there's sort of this attitude among millennials that if something's been done once, then it can never be done again, or they get tired of things very quickly. But when it's something that I think has not been overdone and can be done with slight variation, I wouldn't wonder if that would be something that would be. It would be fun to actually build out something like that. I don't know. It's a thought.
And I think that'd be important. Is it can't just be an attitude would have to be not just oh well, as people on the right we have to do this thing, but it more has to just be culture is something you're created because you love something or you want to do something, not because you feel obligated to do something.
I mean, I'll ask you this question, Fritz. I mean, if what would get you really excited to hear coming out, right? If someone, what kind of fiction would you be really excited to read or discover?
Something it's sort of an idea that I like. It'd be something along the lines of Designated Survivor, but something I would like say with that I like the premise of that, but the way I would have liked it to have gone is essentially the entire sort of nature of the country and the world is permanently changed by this action, and the fact that the guy that becomes the new president, he's just desperately trying to rescue an America that just cannot exist anymore because the sudden loss of the central authority has made it sort of impossible to govern all of the states, and just having to deal with the fact that we no longer have to we can't live in a world where the status quo exists anymore. So sort of it's sort of the opposite of how everything has to return to the liberal democratic status quo, and having a modern population have to deal with. It's sort of I guess it's sort of why I like a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff. But it'd be
kind of fun if you had a political thriller where sort of reactionary fascist elements were the heroes as opposed to the secret villains. I mean, that's a classic inversion, but it's a classic inversion you never see, right?
Mm-hmm. Because I also had in my head, I had this idea of it was like a Star Wars fan fiction where, how there's the Clone Wars with the the Republic and the Separatists, thinking about what if because in that they just in the Clone Wars series and in the movies, they just portray the Separatists as these cartoonishly evil, mustache twirling, well, Asian stereotypes. But like, I had this idea, like, what if there was just a bunch of humans that joined up with them, and they just sort of slowly saw like their cause. They slowly realized that their cause is actually controlled by the leader. That they essentially are controlled opposition, but they try and fight back against that, even though they're fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, I mean, this is always the problem with fanfic, and I actually think that in many ways SCP is fanfic, but I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, but you can't actually write a Star Wars story,
no,
and have it not being owned by Disney more than it's owned by you.
Mm-hmm.
So if the space opera is to survive, it has to be reinvented. I think it could be reinvented darker. There's a really bad movie a few years ago called Valerian, which was Valerian in the City of 1,000 something. It was a crap movie, but it was a space opera that existed outside of the large franchises, and it was one that kind of got me thinking about, okay, so why, what Star Wars was simply an example of a kind of thing, but then it became the thing where all kinds of things like that had to be that thing. And I think you just have to start over. You'd have to find.
No, yeah, it was just sort of a fun idea I had, but it's also just the idea that because I like the idea, like other story ideas I have is essentially that what happens if there is like a fundamental, or there is like a massive war between, say, sort of a friend of mine on Discord pointed out that he almost thinks that sort of a science fiction idea, that sort of the ultimate like reactionary dream is the ability to colonize other planets, because it essentially, if you just have anybody that has any ideology, any group that has any ideology can just settle planets and have that just be their own ideology and be left alone there. And just thinking of like, what if there was just sort of this interstellar war between sort of like this, the Federation from Star Trek, and a bunch of reactionary breakaway planets. I don't know.
This would be an interesting thing to write, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure if And I talked to people like David Stewart and a bunch of other people, Russell Newquist, who work in publishing, and it does seem like it's a hard industry to break into. But I'm not at this point. I'm kind of wondering maybe if sort of the fan fiction community SAP model might not be better to explore something like that before you're ready to kind of like take off with your own idea and you gain the necessary maturity to produce at least a short story.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, yeah, the short stories I've written all died with my hard drive from my laptop that I broke.
You can't do a recover on it?
I'll try, but yeah, I haven't tried.
I haven't had a hard drive genuinely die for 10 years. Okay. Most modern hard drives are easy to recover once you load them as a slave. Maybe laptops could be a little harder, but I don't know. For me, $50 to a computer repairman is almost always worth me losing a file. But we probably are going to break soon. But you're doing some. I hear rumors have it that you're coming back to YouTube.
I mean, I didn't understand that, because like I haven't. I mean, I've made more videos in the past. Like the giant break I had over last summer has been over since I made the fantasy video. And since then I've made a couple other videos, and now I just did this live stream. Like, it's more just me trying to figure out, because like the projects that I want are very, very big projects.
Can you elaborate?
Well, like the thing I want to do is the thing I would like to do next is sort of, speaking of Star Wars, is do like a full-on analysis of the 2003 to 2005 Clone Wars miniseries, because I think that like it sort of shows that, and like a bunch of the novels sort of show that in the right hands, essentially in the hands of anybody that's not George Lucas at the time, the ideas from the prequels in different creators' hands can be executed phenomenally well, because I think that miniseries, which altogether sorry, is like 2 hours and 10 minutes long, so it is feature length, and essentially it works as a movie. like that sort of alleviates so many of the problems that the prequels had and told a much more compelling story.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great idea. I mean, I don't know exactly how in depth you want to do or how much editing you want to put into it, but I know Argent Templar, to bring him up again, he cranks out review videos. I mean, good luck actually showing footage from it. But
yeah, well,
you can shown by Disney, so
actually,
he cranked out an entire review of Evangelion in a very short order. I think it's because he just speaks over it and doesn't edit it.
Yeah, and I did that with the Designated Survivor, and that turned out okay. But like, actually, with the Clone Wars, you can actually watch the whole. There's multiple videos where it's the entire thing on YouTube, and they haven't been taken down.
Yeah, but try to upload that again and see what happens.
Because I'm not sure. Well, I know the ones I've seen, they were uploaded recently.
I've downloaded like 80-year-old songs from YouTube, like, come from the 30s, invented by a singer who died in the 70s, or sung by a singer who died in the 70s. I put them as a background music for one of my videos, and the video gets flagged with privacy. Copyright.
No, I'm not sure that the Clone War because the Clone Wars was made for Cartoon Network, so I'm not sure that specifically is owned by Disney. It probably is now, but
Cartoon Network is very active in taking down its IP from YouTube. So I think you're talking about the intersection of two of the most notorious people on YouTube who come after their stuff being seemingly pirated. I don't know. I mean, I think it shouldn't be too hard to do a review of the Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not much of a Star Wars fan, so
even me, like I haven't really been a Star Wars fan since I was like 13.
Well, have you considered ever looking into other books?
I mean, it's just. I mean, what would you recommend?
Well,
I haven't read a lot of books recently. I mean, no, I've read some recently, but like a lot of it's like nonfiction or just like classic stuff like by Jules Verne.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly read nonfiction, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm some super authority on this stuff. I mean, sort of the classic one is Dune, which is...
I've never read Dune, so I think I need to. But yeah. I have such a huge backlog of books because like I buy books and then I keep forgetting to read them.
Well, reading them is harder than buying them. I find nonfiction books really easy to get through, though, which is kind of nice. It's just the fiction ones that are impossible for me. But at any rate, I think that's it. I feel that if you are, I know you're not doing politics anymore, but if you're ever interested in going back into developing sort of the politics / reactionary political theory thing, I think we're in a very target-rich environment, especially if you're interested in like digging up old books, right? Because I've heard Friedrich the Great's anti-Machiavel come up again and again and again in conversations in this sphere, and it would be interesting to analyze that and sort of the conservative Hegelian tradition and stuff like that.
I mean, because something that I think if I did make another video, I think on politics, I think I would have to address, because I think one of the biggest enemies, if not the biggest enemy currently for reactionaries or people on the right, is not the left. It's the conservative movement. It's the Charlie Kirks. It's the, what is it? Milo Yiannopoulos. It's all of those people and their ilk. The fact that the people
they're stopping an actual reaction from coming about.
Yeah, they're sort of bigger traitors than the left. It's like there's a popular quote.
I'd be careful with that word, but they are politically hurting a genuine reaction. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I can't tell you how bored I am of National Review. It's unreadable, right? It's perfectly unreadable.
Like I'm tired of hearing like there are now like genuine articles like called like the conservative case for reparations, or I think the biggest
that's David Brooks. David Brooks. I really want to be careful about banding around traitor, but he's stepping close to that word. To me, reparations is a very big bright line. I I actually believe that redistribution of some wealth is probably going to be necessary. But the second any of that redistribution obtains the name reparations, like the government of the United States has crossed a big line for me and has lost an enormous amount of its legitimacy.
The what of the United States?
The government of the United States and the framework of its entire government. At that point, I'm just trying to find ways to to get out. No pun intended.
Yeah, and I think it's that, and it's I think the big lolcow, or the one that a lot of people on the right really despise, outside of, it's like Ben Shapiro has gotten really bad in the past several months. Like specifically,
I've stopped following him.
I just follow him. Just
he's so irritating.
I mean, like the era of the thug life, Ben Shapiro is truly, dead and gone, because it's now.
All I know about that is that the left cannot get over owned by facts and logic, right? Like they can't get over Ben Shapiro. Like he hasn't been a thing. He hasn't been he was kind of cool in 2014, but he hasn't really been a thing since 2016.
Mm-hmm.
At the left, they're just they're apoplectic about these stupid Ben Shapiro owns college student videos from 3 years ago. I mean, talk to being late to the party. Jesus, those videos are festering in their own bile at this stage.
It's, I think though the biggest one that people hate is John French. I think he's a Reformed Christian, but
you mean David French?
David French, yes, David French. He sucks. Just I think he even made a conservative case for, drag queen story time.
I wouldn't be surprised. I know he's a genuine Christian in his Orthodox point of view, but his solution politically is complete laying down of arms in the culture war.
As a principled conservative, I believe in compromise. That's why that's why I'm for giving the left absolutely everything it wants and calling anybody that disagrees with that evil. Yeah. The thing that actually is starting to scare me is I don't know how true this is, but it's isn't it in Florida they passed a law now saying that anti-Semitic speech is no longer considered free speech, or you're not allowed to criticize Israel, or it's people have gotten fired, or they have laws in Texas where you have to say that you're not going to criticize Israel if you want a public sector job.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine all of these things are coming down the line, which it kind of brings the question to the reactionary community of what kind of existence you want to have under this system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, without more organization, without tighter knit communities, it's going to be a very easy salami slice operation for the West. And without actual creative actors and everything as well.
Though I think, again, but on foreign policy, I think we talked about this before, but there is definitely a because I think this could possibly, Donald Trump has definitely sloughed off, or he has certainly alienated a huge portion of the young white male audience that helped get him into power in the first place, because so many of us do not care about Israel. We do not care about wars in the Middle East. I think that's why people like Tulsi Gabbard are almost unironically getting a lot of support from the exact same people, just because there is absolutely a room for a movement of a right-wing anti-war movement.
I don't think there is.
Really?
Where does it fit? I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't be good, but are we talking about an actual American politics, or you just like to see it emerge in select communities? Because I don't think that there is really a place for that, because I think the right is dying away very fast politically in this country. And the question is exactly how, I guess, unless you're saying that Tulsi Gabbard is going to become the new right wing, which is interesting.
But I'm just saying is that the reactionary sphere seems to be decidedly anti-interventionist, yet there seems to be no mainstream politician that actually agrees with that both sides actually are really, the same when it comes to foreign policy, just to different degrees.
Yeah, I mean, this is always hard. I think that the foreign policy questions are quite difficult. I like Tulsi too. Don't get me wrong. But when I'm looking at the Democratic presidential debate, I'm not really asking who's going to be president in 2020. I'm asking what is the Overton window going to look like in 2030.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm studying. And to me, the foreign policy thing, it's kind of a barometer, but aside from its role as a barometer, it's not particularly interesting to me. And this is so because I don't think it's really going to change that much. I don't think that. I mean, I don't think that America is ready to watch China and Russia advance on its withdrawal of hegemony in terms of military bases. I also don't think the American people want to have another boots on the ground intervention anywhere in the Middle East. And between those two extremes, I think we're just going to bounce around like a pinball for the next 20 years until we hit another catastrophe. But I don't think anything's going to really change within that. And so for myself, the only question I'm asking is like, what is the Overton window going to be like in 2030, in 10 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
And like, how do we prepare for that? That's
speaking of which, and like somebody posted this in the chat, is like, I remember you talking with somebody on some other stream a while ago. Sorry. I'm drinking a Japanese beer right now, but
is it Kieran?
No, unfortunately, no, they didn't have it. It's Sapporo.
Sapporo? Okay.
Yeah, it's the closest thing to it. But it's very good. But it's like it was somebody that said, like, they're on the left, but they say, like, you asked them, what's the most important sort of political thing for you? And he said, like, maintaining the American hegemony.
Oh yeah, that was like a long time ago. That was the guy that was the atheist guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was on it's another one of those right wingers that went silent. It's just terrible.
Speaking of which,
yeah, there are a lot of he was like this brochurelist guy. He was like a brochurelist guy who was like a super atheist, and the only thing he wanted to do was like maintain American military hegemony because the Marshall Plan, as if the third world would starve if we weren't airdropping rations to them, which we're not.
Well, also maybe they wouldn't starve if we didn't just keep bombing them.
Well, I'm not ready to play into the Noam Chomsky, the third world is poor because we're bombing.
No, I'm specifically thinking of Libya, which was a fairly wealthy country, and then as a direct result of the regime change caused by the Western powers collapsed. Like, I'm not going to the West is racist, but I'm saying, in certain instances, I think it's undeniable that us bombing Libya had a very negative effect on that country.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was not sort of in our national interest, but I mean, I guess the question is, I mean, if it wasn't Libya, it was going to be something. And the problem is, ultimately, does Europe or anywhere need or want to have borders?
I mean, that's a question
that exits the Overton window, which the left wants to make it so that any attempt to close borders in any way is unacceptable in a political sphere. And I'm not so sure that what I'm hearing from Tulsi or Yang indicates that this is going to be any different. And with that demographic reality coming down the line, then I think you can see it quite. I don't think you're going to have to worry about Turning Point USA in about 15 years.
Turning Point USA. I mean, that's the biggest problem. I think people why you could use the word, in certain cases, use the word traitor to the sort of mainstream right is the fact that we know and we can see in real time the fact that they will always adopt the less social policies. With every within 5 years, what the left is okay with in 1 year. You can be guaranteed that there will be Republicans arguing for the exact same thing and saying it's a conservative value 5 years later. But
I think that's less treachery and more just the nature of politics we are operating within, right? Mm-hmm. And it's because the right doesn't play metapolitics.
No,
it never has. And I mean, I don't really know what to do with that, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with a right that doesn't understand how metapolitics is played. It would rather convince itself that it's going to win than it would convince itself that it can play. It needs to do meta politics, right? It's really weird. I mean, I guess it's not weird. It's just something the right's never been trained to do.
Yeah, just sort of like, I think as we're wrapping up, but like because like you were on this channel, the sort of debate channel with that atheist a little while ago. Like what? The one, the one with the lesbian, the one with the
lesbian.
She had like the smoky smoker's voice. It was like sort of high. It was like modern day debate. That was the channel.
Oh yeah, with Bionic Dance.
The thing I'm sort of like, I'd like to be on there just like if I wanted to debate, say like Benedict XVII on like, liberal, classical liberalism versus like some form of reactionary thought. But like, my problem with that channel is like, he seems to be deliberately, he seems to be inadvertently just bringing back all the same debates that were hashed out in the late 2000s, like bringing on like Ken Ham to debate Gaull's engineer of like, did the Noadic flood ever happen? Like really happen? Those are the last debates I want to have or think are at all interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious when you think about it, isn't it?
We need it to be 2007 again. That's the only thing that validates our existence. My problem is like, there is the right sort of taking the bait, even though it's not really bait. It's both sides acting stupid.
Well, what do you mean? You mean like Christians debating about like the Noadic flood and all that stuff?
Yeah. And the atheists like thinking that any of this matters anymore.
Yeah, I guess it just depends what you think is going to be is more pathetic.
I mean, for me, it's just like my biggest problem with atheism is it's the fact that it's so damn boring.
Yeah, it's boring.
I think I could make this. It's like, let's take video games as an example. It's like, I like video games. I play video games. I mean, I can understand people that don't like them, but like, there's been many communities that have been created around video games, and like people can argue the merits of video games, whether or not they're good or bad for society. But imagine if there was a group of people that just decided, we're gonna create our own community that's basically says that we don't like video games. And it's like, doesn't that sound like the most boring thing ever?
Oh, you mean like with atheists?
Yeah.
I guess to me, that analogy would work for me if I didn't hate the analogy of religion to video games more than
but you understand what I mean.
I understand that you can't just have negative ideas. This is something.
Well, you can, but you become boring and insufferable.
Yeah, well, you become a lot of things, and it's not a good position to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I don't know. I guess I just have to kind of like come to terms with the fact that they're just people who find this useful, right? They're like they find this debate interesting. It's certainly not what has diminished Christianity. What diminished Christianity is a lack of cultural and metapolitical power. It's not that they lost debates against Christopher Hitchens.
It was the fact that those debates had happened in the first place. Or it was
even prior to that, right? I mean, the debates were going to happen because people were inside of a culture where we were looking for the reason why these problems like this were occurring, and this was the solution we had.
Mm-hmm. It was a solution we had to, why is it that there was terrorism, and why was it that the Iraq War wasn't going on? Well, it's because George Bush prayed and there was radical Muslims. Therefore, it's because of religion, but we all know that.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. I mean,
I would like to answer this, Mr. Monopoly, since you've been, asking questions all night. So yeah, about monarchies, I still think that there's a lot. I still stand by sort of, I think, at least in a Confucian sense, there is still like a merit to sort of thinking about government and politics as sort of being thinking about it as the same relationship that you have in a family, I think there's benefits to that. But I think that, you should have it there. Different types of government should exist for different cultures and whatnot, because I think perhaps something like a, Holy Roman Empire style elective monarchy could work better in the United States. Like, this is just like complete idealism, but something decentralized and something in which the various member states have at least some input on the central government would probably work much better in a as massive and as decentralized a country as the United States. That's why, like, in any of the, I sort of half unironically, anytime there's, how there's the age-old discussion of should we abolish the Electoral College or not, I actually say, well, actually, no, we should. I make the point of going, broke is abolishing the Electoral College and relying on the popular vote. Woke is keeping the Electoral College. Bespoke is abolishing the popular vote and just having the electors decide the president is.
I mean, it's always hard because I mean that there's no energy anywhere in our society for anything remotely resembling that.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's sort of, somebody asked the question of, am I still a monarchist? So I want to answer it.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, it's I see the advantages of monarchy. There's just no
energy behind it.
It's too abstract. It's just too abstract. I mean, what else? I just don't. I kind of don't know what to say in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. But I guess, like, we can sort of close this in on culture. Is like, yeah. What was I gonna say? It's just, for me, I'm just trying to, like, look in the margins and look in, like, what is the weird stuff? Where's, like, because you'll often find, like, stuff that you find edifying in places like that have been oft overlooked. I do find it funny that, like, just to briefly talk about anime, is I like how basically my favorite animes are the ones that nobody else likes, even though I tend to find them edifying.
Such as
Eden of the East. It's sort of akin to, like, Jace, to, like, the Bourne movies of, like, a guy that lost his memories and, like, has to deal with, like, this big organization and whatnot. But, like, if you sort of read into it, there's a lot of sort of Christian themes as opposed to just imagery to it, and it sort of at the end basically says, yeah, having a monarchy would be a good idea.
Well, I guess if you can find the right person, that's
because what I would say about anime is, like, I fully recognize that it has a lot of its problems, but something that they tend to do really well is, like, as opposed to Western animation, which just seems, so much of it just seems like absolute garbage now, you can at least with anime, like, know that they're going to have interesting concepts and a really good music and excellent sort of sense of style. Even though that seems to be just saying that's all style and no substance, at least the style in itself is something you can enjoy separately.
I have to have both. I can't just, and I don't, the style of anime is too saccharine for me.
Well, I mean, there's different types of style in it, obviously.
It's too sticky. I mean, I don't know how to put this, right? Like, cuteness is enjoyable, but when it's turned up so high, I don't know. I just tap,
Yeah, I get that, and I think it's and again, and it's in large part to just what seems like in Western animation, where they're just like, we're going to deliberately try and make our characters look as ugly as we possibly can.
Well, I mean, there are certain things like that, but I mean, isn't there a medium where you have beautiful animation and actual substance of some kind, I guess?
Well, I think you had that with people like Miyazaki and like when Disney used to make 2D animated films, but
yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean,
but I think the problem is, like, Miyazaki has his famous quote where he says, anime was a mistake, and what he's talking about is the fact that, like, he put so much work into trying to make his characters not just, yes, they're cute and saccharine, but, like, there's also a definite realism to them. Like, he, like, study how, like, 10-year-old girls would act, like, and then put that in the movie. Whereas, like, he says that essentially modern anime is created by people that have no social interaction and don't know how human beings act. So their characters in turn don't act like human beings.
But don't you also feel, and this is something someone brought up to me, and I'm gonna probably put it in my video about anime, that like Miyazaki is like half a step away from being a feminist himself when you think about it. Like, he's in a traditional society, so he's not quite as like cocked, but he has all of these. There's just some serious problems here, right?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I've thought about that too. Like, I completely understand where you're coming from there. But I think you've pointed out is the fact that even though you have like all these very strong female characters, they're at least still feminine.
You mean in Miyazaki? I mean, yeah, they're still feminine because of Japanese society. But just think, like, for instance, I'll ask you this question about anime. Like, why do all of the people who like anime, including the men, seem to have this like weird fascination with just the women of anime, but seem to have this weird indifference towards any of the male characters?
Yeah,
well, it's also compounded by the fact that, like, I mean, this is also compounded by the fact that like there are no real male characters in anime the way in Miyazaki's anime. There are boys, right? But like, it's really hard to think of like a male character.
Well, there's Porco Rosso.
Yeah, exactly, and he's a pig.
Mm-hmm.
So like the only male anime character we can think of is like literally a pig.
Mm-hmm. But though it's done, to be fair, it's done in an endearing way. But yeah,
that, but like this is but it's not. Miyazaki is the best example, right? Like, we still have a genre where
there is Lupin the Third. People, I haven't seen that, but people should like,
which is not his character.
Hmm.
You know, so but here's the question. I guess I'm just going to kind of return to this. Like, the question that I'm gonna return to here is sort of why in a genre, let's just say it is traditional. Like, the reason why we like anime is because it kind of like carries us back to when like men were men and stuff like that in the 19th century. Why do all anime fans just seem to have this fascination with female characters and none with the male characters? Like,
I don't think it's as extreme as that, but you know, like, I'm not going to say that's
wrong, right?
Yeah, and I sort of partially agree with you there. I think like, and I think, you know, there is the fact that like people tend to like associate more with the feminine form, but no, like, you're right. Like, I do wish there was just more actual male. I mean, people love the JoJo series, the JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, and that is like completely filled with just sort of like overly caricaturized like masculine macho men from like the 19th century.
You mean I don't know what JoJo is. It's from the 19th century?
No, it's a manga series that started in the 80s and has a very, very distinctive style. And in like with its anime adaptation, but like it's like I think the first series of it takes place in the late 19th century with like a gentleman, like an English gentleman.
I mean, I guess it traditionally, and I did talk to this about Arjun I talked to Arjun about this. Traditionally, when men looked at fiction, they tended to kind of like take the male characters as their models and not the female ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes this really kind of bizarre thing, I guess, right?
And like, again, I agree with you. Like, you're not really preaching to somebody that, like, just because I like a lot of anime doesn't mean I don't recognize that there are massive problems in it. It's just the fact that I think there's enough that's interesting and good in it that I watch it over other things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, of course, everyone has their artists, and I used to watch anime too, you know. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I don't understand the appeal to it in part.
What's interesting is that, because I know you keep mentioning how like back in the late 90s when you were into anime, people were all talking about Evangelion, and now that still seems to be the thing that people talk about. And what's interesting is like how the modern world 22 years later has reacted to when they made the Netflix adaptation of it, where they had a literal transgender person voice the main character. And they like, and apparently it was saying this is what's needed in the Trump era. And like, apparently like one of the Democratic candidates posted like a meme that had a character from Evangelion in it.
Yeah, I think Evangelion is really, really, really overrated. I think it was only ever above average. And I'm gobsmacked about how this thing lasted 25 years or however long it's been since the early 90s at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe someone else can explain this to me, but either anime is incredibly uninspired or nothing's been going on worthwhile. If Evangelion is still top of the heap so long after it came out. I think it's one thing if it's like an actual masterpiece. It's no mystery why people are still talking about Dante, 600 years after he wrote. But when it's Evangelion, come on. The creator doesn't have any idea what he meant by the ending. And like, stop trying. It's only people trying to figure it out that gives it any meaning. Mm-hmm. And the characters are juvenile. I don't want to keep on going on, but I guess I am going on.
But I would say that the closest thing that we have now to that is Attack on Titan, which in a recent article from
anime.
No, I'm talking about an anime that's like a viewed like Evangelion was. And like probably recent article said it's bad because it's fascist. Like, even though it's basically just about, I've only watched a few episodes of, but I know I like it enough for what it is.
I guess that the thing I kind of want, I guess this is sort of the things I'm constantly trying to get past the point where we are. I'm not treading water on like the slightly better, like anime is, and when I was in the 90s, I was like, anime is better than the Western animation. So, and then I'm like, well, it's got its own set of flaws, and I just kind of want to get past these things. If a problem keeps on going on, and people know there's a problem, and the only reason why they keep on putting up with it is because this problem is better than their neighbor's problem, and that's a lack of innovation. You should be trying to fix the problem that you have in whatever genre, not comparing it to a worse problem. And that's the problem I have with the apologies for anime, is that they're always pointing out how, yes, it's got all these problems. We haven't fixed them in 25 years, but did you look at all the problems in Western animation? They're so much worse.
But and then like when I look at like how certain Western anime, and I'm gonna agree with you on this, but is that in some Western animation, some of the stuff they've done is inspiring, and like you point out, you really loved Over the Garden Wall, right?
Yeah, that was genuinely. You talk about something that I saw recently. That was the last thing I remember seeing that was like, wow, this is actually a genuinely compelling piece of art. Like,
because essentially it's I almost thought of like, considering it's like the anti-Shrek, or it's the anti, we're going to take all these like folk tales and like homages to like this culture's folk history and make fun of it. We're just going to celebrate it, because it's all very clearly homaging, periods of American folk culture. And it's
I like the fact that it wasn't so clear that it was just a use of them. It was neither a homage or, I didn't catch that the Potatoes and Molasses song was a Shirley Temple. Was a parody of a Shirley Temple number. I'm like, I realized it way after I saw it, but the fact that it was so separated means that I didn't immediately catch all the references.
Mm-hmm. And like was beautifully animated in the sense that you have such a simplistic, such simple character design, but this absolutely gorgeous backgrounds.
Well, I have to say, if that is the direction you're taking, if you're going to learn from Miyazaki and make Over the Garden Wall, that's moving forward.
Yeah.
If we're 25 years later and we're not learning from Miyazaki to create something like Over the Garden Wall, we're just assuring us that the unsolved problems of anime that have been unsolved for 20 years are their stagnant problems are better than our metastasizing problem with preachy social justice warrior animation. Like, I'm just past that. Like, I just
and even me, like, I think that
worse is no longer the reason for me to consume anything, right?
Mm. I think like and for me, my favorite TV series of all time, Avatar: Last Airbender, you know, way more influenced by anime, but like the way I describe it is essentially it's Western ethics and metaphysics, but in an Eastern setting.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's very clear there's like an image of there's like one of the main characters essentially acts exactly like and resolves sort of their character arc exactly as the prodigal son.
I guess I was less in, I don't I only saw an episode or two of that. Maybe it gets a lot better. Bias wasn't impressed, and it never really caught me for that reason. But I would say, just to close up this conversation, I think with monarchy and all of this stuff like this, I think just the place where I'm thinking, and this is sort of maybe my final thoughts on all of the stuff we've been talking about. Like, if you see something like democracy has problems, right? Like, instead of like waiting for a system to collapse and then like maybe, but probably not, trying to facilitate some government takeover, like, why not try to create something that embodies what you liked about monarchy at a level that you actually have control over?
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, that's just where it's at. And I guess I'm stuck at a point where I can no longer kind of like rub my hands together as things collapse. It just seems,
because it's going to, pardon my French, but it's going to fuck everybody. We're not going to sit isolated on the sidelines and then create our reactionary utopia. We're going to be swept under the tide along with everybody else.
There's that. It's just
unless we can create a successful community that can withstand societal collapse.
I mean, it's also just so fundamentally lazy too.
Yeah.
Nothing better than complaining about things collapsing. But yeah, that's probably a good place to end, since I'm kind of out of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's fun for me. It's like, just for my closing remarks, is just sort of talk with culture and everything. It is fun. I guess maybe as advice to the chat or people that watch this is seek out the stuff that, like, don't just complain, but also either create or, uncover and promote things that you find are compelling. Even if other people don't like it, you should do it if you think it's, compelling. But yeah, I think that's all. Thank you for coming on.
I would murder for a few good reactionary artists that I could talk about to people, that were good enough that I could talk about them to people who are progressive, and we could not talk about politics and still incorporate some of those ideas. Would be amazing.
Well, anyways, thank you everybody. Thank you for coming on, and God bless everybody.
Thanks.
Have a happy feast of Saint Heinrich II.